right, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, welcome everybody. It's so good to see all your beautiful shining faces. I see very many of our task force members, so welcome to our third meeting. I also see several observers. Your presence is also valued and welcome. As is said in our public notice, we are, reserve the conversation to task force members, but we welcome you listening to our work. And I also invite people, several of you have reached out to me separately through email with your observations about our work. I welcome that. My email address is paulo.demaria@education.ohio.gov. And so any of you observers, if you ever want to weigh in with comments and suggestions about the work, that's always welcome. One of the things we'll be doing today is moving into breakout sessions. Carolyn Jones has done a great job of organizing. We have actually set up separate teams meetings for the breakouts. And those of you who are on the task force should or will receive either an email, or you should have already been informed about what group you're in and what link you will need. Others of you, if you are not a task force member, we still want to invite you to participate in the breakout group discussions. Listen into the discussions of the breakout groups. So Carolyn will put into the chat the different links for the 4 groups. If you are not, if chat is not enabled for you, if you would send Carolyn an email, she will send you the information for the breakout groups in that manner. Her email address is carolyn.jones@education.ohio.gov. With that as by way of introduction, what I'm going to do is share my screen here and do a little bit of recap about where we've been so far. So let me do that. If my computer cooperates. Hopefully my screen is being shared with you right now. And so let's just do a little bit of a recap. First of all, at our very first meeting, as you recall, I'm sorry?
Can't see your screen. We can't see your screen.
Okay. Is that true for everybody?
I can see it.
Okay.
I can see it.
I can see it.
And so can I.
You see it.
Very
Maybe
good.
it's just
Well, Leanne, I will. I'll talk through the slides very precisely, so it should be okay if you can't see it. And so let's proceed. So at our first meeting, we started by introducing ourselves to each other and also having a discussion about the various purposes of the task force. And I keep reminding people what those purposes are, and I'll do a little bit of that in this presentation because it's important that we always kind of ground ourselves in that work. We also heard a really fine data presentation by Heather and Eben Dowell on our team, that really sets the groundwork for the issues that we're really trying to address. The fact that the data shows us that here are certain students, our Black students in Ohio, that are not generally performing as well as their peers, and by significant amounts. And yet there's every reason to believe, and certain data that we have from specific schools and districts show us that we can do better. And that's really what the work of this task force is about, is what does better look like, and how do we identify what better looks like? How do we support the implementation of what better looks like in the interest of helping those students reach those higher levels of academic achievement that put them on the trajectory for success. In between the first and the second meetings, I asked participants of our task force to reflect a little bit on what was happening in their particular school or district. And so we had several members submit what I've called best practices templates, because one of the reasons many task force members were chosen because you were recommended by your respective associations or what have you for the great work that you're doing. And so a number of those were prepared, and those ultimately helped support and undergird our second meeting, which really involved 3 district presentations. We heard from Licking Heights, we heard from Steubenville, we heard from Beechwood. One of the things that emerged from those discussions was a little document that I cobbled together. So as you can imagine, when we heard those presentations, I was taking notes, and in my head, I was trying to sort of systematize what I was hearing, synthesize the different things that we heard those 3 districts were doing. Those districts were chosen because they tended to show not only higher performance of their Black students, but also continuing improvement in the performance of their Black students. That was what the data showed. And so I put together a document called What I Heard, and I identified, and I admit that I did this myself, several categories. And I made it clear to people when I shared that document with the task force members to say, hey, reflect on what you heard and add that to this document. I admitted that it was my doing these different categories. And part of what we want to do today is see whether those are the right categories. And so part of today's structure will be around the different categories that emerge in that document, both to enhance our continuing understanding of the practices that are captured by those different categories, as well as asking ourselves, do these seem like the right categories for our work going forward? So that's really what's going to be the purpose of today's meeting. That's the fourth or the last bullet on this page, is really talking more about that framework and going through this process that we're going through right now, which is sort of the initial development of the framework. And if you recall, the very first purpose of our charge is really this one about understanding and identifying best academic and non-academic practice models, strategies, and actions. And that's really what the last meeting was about, what some of those best practices templates were about, and what today's meeting is about. And the reason that's so important is it really supports many of the other of the 7 purposes. So it's by understanding and identifying those practices that will help inform purpose 3, sort of the template and self-assessment tools. It will motivate us to think about purpose 2, which is how do we support effective change and improvement management. It'll support 4, which is really how do we disseminate that information and promote implementation of those best practices. It'll drive some of our work in how do we measure whether those practices are in fact being implemented, whether they result in changes in adult behavior and actually make a difference in terms of academic outcomes for students. And they'll also have an impact on purposes 6 and 7, which is really arriving at clarity around our expectations for students as well as our expectations for the statewide education system for districts and targets of that work. So I wanted to refresh people's memories about the different purposes and really highlight why we're focusing on this first set, that identification process. So I want to, before we get into the guts of today's meeting, and the bulk of our time is going to be spent in small group discussions, and I'll say a little bit more about that when we get there. These are the 6 categories that ultimately emerged from my synthesis and that I used in the What I Heard document. And first of all, I want to thank those of you who, and I know for some of you, the Google Doc link didn't work. I tried to send it out again, but I know that people went into the document, they added their thoughts and observations, and it was really nice to read the recaps of the 3 presentations and how, the different observations that were made. Everything from, the power of staff committees to the idea of a Maymester and these special, sort of academically intense periods and, student affinity groups and staff affinity groups and all sorts of things that fit into these 6 categories. And so I'm going to read them off the page here. Hopefully you've seen them in the documents that we'll use, and the facilitators that guide the small group discussion will walk you through these 6 sections. So the first one is leadership, right? And this ranges from everything that maybe a board might do, the superintendent might do, a principal and his or her capabilities and competencies and actions. It might also involve teacher leaders, staff roles in leadership, and so forth and so on. The second one is really this notion of staff involvement and development. How are staff, brought into the work of continuous improvement and improvement for specific groups of students and Black students and what have you? What role and how is specific attention paid to staff involvement and staff development around that work. The third one is really about curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. What are those things happening in the classroom, in the academic setting, that really are deliberate and thoughtful and structured in a way that makes that experience meaningful, engaging, and ultimately successful for Black students. And in this, I always want to make sure that this is not for us to talk about specific curriculum, items or programs. This is more curriculum generally. We're not talking about, hey, is success for all a great, curricular model for reading or what, because ultimately we want to respect and preserve local control over curricular choices. But we know that being deliberate and attentive to curriculum is an important factor. So how does that enter into our thinking about these best academic practice models? The fourth category is really student supports and empowerment. I think we heard time and time again, and this came out also in some of the videos that I sent in the very earliest stages of our work that reflected, a conference that was held up in Youngstown. And there too, you got this strong sense that providing special supports for students, and this really, involves all students that have particular needs that may stand in the way of being in their very best absolute posture to benefit from the academic experience that's taking place in the schools. What does that look like? And some of that is really, creates this sense of belonging. I think we find so often that people talk about, are students engaged? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they have relationships with adults that care about them, that make them feel comfortable that they can, address their challenges, help them with additional supports, and that a student who, needs glasses and can't see the whiteboard, or is hungry, or is, in mental distress, that we need to, be attentive to addressing those needs as part of creating the conditions for a successful academic experience. The fifth category is really, how do we engage the wider community and family supports, always understanding that the family is going to play such an important and predominant role in a student's education. What do those things look like, and how do we engage other community partners in the work? So there's this category number 5, because again, we heard that from a variety of the different presenters about the importance of those partnerships and collaborations, everything from with higher education institutions to faith-based organizations and other places. What does that look like? And the last one is really this commitment to data analysis. And I want to emphasize that here, and I'll emphasize it in other places, that we have to be driven by the data. And I know that this is a particularly challenging time for data because of the disruptions due to the pandemic. You would expect me, the head of the State Department, to talk about state data, but actually more and more I've been talking about using local data, using data that's more easily accessible to districts, because by the time the state gets data, it's really old. And what I really like is more, data that shows what formative activity is going on, whether progress is being made in very real-time ways. So I'm always interested in understanding, and this will come up in your small group discussions about, what data do you use? What data do you look at to test whether progress is happening, whether improvement is happening? And yes, maybe some of it is state level data, but I'm also for, innovative uses of data, like, what about grade point average? What about discipline data? What about student surveys? Those kinds of things. And while some of those may not necessarily get at academics, we always ultimately don't want to lose sight that the bottom line for this work is academic achievement. So we have to have those academic measures, and we have to look at the way those are playing out and the way those are moving. So those are the 6 categories, and you're going to hear reference to those categories quite a number of times today, because it's really, that's what we're testing. By the end of today, you will have gone through some small group exercises, and we'll be sharing your stories about what's happening in your school or district. Those of you who may not be working directly in schools or districts, we want you to participate too, based on your knowledge of research, your knowledge of schools that your children might have gone to, your own experiences as an individual or as an educator. So your thoughts are also valued in that process. Task force members who are not practitioners, and the conclusion of those small group discussions will really be about, do these 6 categories seem to be right to you? And that really includes a couple of aspects. Maybe there are too many. Maybe some of them can be merged together and streamline the number. Maybe we're missing something. So maybe we need to add something or clarify what a particular category actually needs. Your facilitators will walk you through that process as well. So that's a little bit of a review. That kind of concludes my review of how we've come and a little bit of a tee up to what we're going to try to do today. Let me stop there and see if task force members have any particular questions. Oh, I should remind you, feel free to use the raise your hand, raising hand feature, which those of you who are working off the traditional platform of Teams, you'll see at the top of your screen, there's that hand. And if you mouse over it and click on it, it will light up yellow, and that will show up on my screen, and I'll know to call on you. It's a kind of a small group, so you shouldn't hesitate to weigh in. Just speak up verbally, but hand raising always is a helpful pursuit. Okay, so let's talk about the exercise that we're now going to dive into. And what I'm going to do is actually model what you're about to go through so that you have a little bit of a sense of how I'd like the activity to unfold. And I'm going to do that in a one-on-one discussion with Dave Taylor. Dave is a good friend. In fact, it's the second time I've spent a lot of time with him this week. We had a really good conversation the other day about, of all things, community school transportation challenges. And Dave is on top of those issues, and we're trying to be on top of those issues too. So it was a great conversation. But Dave runs a fantastic school that I love, the Dayton Early College Academy, has a great track record, is very highly regarded. And he agreed that he would be my sort of test. I'm going to be the test facilitator. He's going to be the test participant, just to illustrate what this process is going to look like. Then once Dave and I conclude, and we're only going to take about 15 minutes to kind of show you what we're interested in doing. Then we'll break into small groups. And you will have, each group will have a facilitator. I've asked a member of my staff to be the facilitator. They'll pretty much use the same script that I'm going to kind of use with Dave. And they'll facilitate a conversation that's going to last, for about an hour. It might go a little bit longer than that because there is a lot of ground to cover, but we're gonna try our best to keep it moving along. And the focus of those conversations there'll be sort of two ideas. One is to ask the practitioners who are working day-to-day in schools and districts to kind of reflect first with their practices that fit into these categories, but then ask others who are members of the task force to reflect as well, so that nobody gets left out. But the practitioners get to talk a little bit first, because I think in their heads, this stuff is more kind of front of mind. And then there'll be some discussion at the end of those conversations about the different framework components and whether it makes sense. Then we'll regroup here and have a debrief. People will report out and reflect on the small group work. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to transition to this conversation that I'm going to have with Dave that illustrates kind of the thing that we're going to do. So my name's Paulo Di Maria. I'm going to be your facilitator, Dave, for the next few minutes. We really have two goals. First, I want to learn from you what's going on in your school to share. I want you to share with us specific actions, tactics, and strategies that contribute in your school to supporting the academic success of Black students. We're also going to ask non-practitioners to weigh in. We're going to spend about 8 to 10 minutes on each category. And Dave, you and I aren't going to spend that much time. We're going to move a little bit more quickly.
Right.
And then we're going to talk about the categories at the end to see if they make sense. And so you'll be asked if there are any questions about the process, but let's just dive in. The first category, Dave, as you know, is leadership. And I know how much you appreciate that category. It involves anything that reflects how a district or school is led in promoting and implementing best practice academic models. It could include board support, principal training and development, staff leadership structures like committees or teacher leaders, and those sorts of things. So tell me a little bit about what activities and practices around leadership do you pursue in your school that are specifically impactful on Black student success and outcomes?
Yeah, well, thanks, first of all, for letting me do this. I appreciate the opportunity to participate. Yeah, you're right. I think leadership is absolutely a key driver when you're working in schools, especially, in the work that we're doing. I think, one of the things that jumps out, and I'll talk more about this later on, is the priority that we place on recruiting, developing, and retaining diverse leaders. I think, and that doesn't necessarily mean like in formal roles. It obviously means that, and that's very important, but it also means in a number of roles throughout the course of the organization. I think it's dangerous to say, if we fill this type of position with diverse candidates, then we're good. We want to see principals, coaches, teachers, aides, every position filled with diverse candidates as much as possible. We have a strategic plan that we put together with support from our board. That a lot of our equity issues were kind of central to the development of that plan, and that filters through our district leadership team, to our building leadership teams, all the way down to our grade and content level teams. So at the PLC level. One of the things that's been really important around leadership is making sure that we have this idea of distributed leadership that really questions the range of who is permitted to have power in conversations. This is really, really messy work, and honestly, really difficult. If you look at, historically, our staff, we've been transitioning from a very, very white staff historically to a more diverse staff. We're now at about 35-40% of our staff of our teaching staff being people of color. And that's led to a lot of conversations about practices that we've had in place. Are those practices honoring to our students? Are those practices dignifying to our students? And really, we've had to question who's allowed to speak in certain spaces, who's given power to actually question what our sacred cows are as an organization. So, and then of course from there, I think from across the board, having really high expectations of our instructional staff, of our families, and of our students, coming down from the leadership level.
Great. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Great. I had a little bit of a glitch here that dropped me off. Okay, and then in the small groups, other people will be asked to weigh in, including other practitioners as well as others in the group, and continue to flesh out that part of the rubric. So let's go to the second category. This is really staff involvement and development. You touched a little bit on this, but let's dig into it a little bit further. This could include like staff training initiatives, diversity initiatives, culture building, human resource processes. You actually talked a little bit about your recruitment and development at the leadership level. So reflect a little bit more about staff involvement and development in your school, and how that may have a specific impact on Black student success.
Yeah, so I think if we do one thing really well, it's relationships. We're really, one of the kind of key drivers for us. We believe that deep, meaningful relationships allow us to push kids academically. So we charge everyone on staff, and again, this will come up probably more than once. Is our teachers from the middle school up, their title is teacher/advisor. They have somewhere between 15 and 22 students who they are essentially a surrogate parent for. They are responsible for those kids at school. And if that person doesn't work, we work really hard to make sure that there is a caring adult connected to every single student. And so in the hiring process, that's a key part of the conversation. Are you willing? Are you able? Are you capable of getting to know our kids? And so we actually have in the hiring process a demo lesson, and we ask our students for their feedback. Is this somebody who you'd be willing to build a relationship with? Is this somebody that you can listen to and you can trust? And we've had more than one candidate who we felt positively about. Our students didn't, and we went the other way. We didn't go with that candidate. And so it's really about leveraging that.
Just to check my understanding, you're saying you involve students in your hiring process?
Yeah, every time. Yes, absolutely. So we've tried having them on the actual, initial interviews. That doesn't work terribly well around their schedules. But the demo lesson serves multiple purposes. It allows us to actually watch the teacher teach, but it also gives us an opportunity. So after that demo lesson's over, we separate the teacher from the students. We have the teacher debrief with the team, and we have the students debrief with one of our staff members. So we have set questions that we ask them, and they very quickly will let us know, this is a DECA teacher, this isn't a DECA teacher, and here's why. The next one, everyone on staff, we're actually a part of a group called the Equity Fellows. I happen to be a coach for that organization here in Montgomery County. And so all of our staff members have been, we actually divide our staff meetings up into 3 different focuses: instructional focus, classroom culture, and equity. And so about a third of our staff meetings are focused around, what kind of culture are we creating, and what is your personal journey as an educator? Regardless of your race and your background, are you mindful of the students that you're serving, and are you doing so in a way that's honoring to the kids that are in front of you? We worked really hard to encourage our own graduates to come back and work at DECA. If you think about this, we have 97% of our students are Black, and if we're looking for a more diverse workforce, like, we literally have them sitting in our seats. So I've said to our staff, like, we are the world's worst salespeople, right? We have a captive audience for 13 years, and if we can't convince them to come back and work here, like, we're doing a really bad job, right? I mean, we probably shouldn't be here. So our goal should be to make this a place that's so great for them that they want to come back after they do their 4 years in college to work here longer. And that's worked really, really well. We've been hiring a ton of our grads. And what we found is that those are folks who are really invested in our community, who are really committed to making sure that our school continues in the way that it had for them. That's been a real success for us. We also lean on our diverse staff to help us find like-minded teachers. We've worked really hard with our local schools of education, the college level, to build positive relationships so that they know who we're looking for, whether they happen to be diverse candidates or not. They want to know that the types of people who are good fits for our school. So when we hire them, they're folks who can come in and hit the ground running to serve our kids well. Another thing that I think has been really helpful for our children, for our students, is we don't have a high tolerance for ineffective teachers. If we talk all the time about really good teachers being absolutely important, we've invested heavily in instructional coaching and helping teachers develop and having really strong supports for folks. So there's lots of observations in the classrooms, lots of in-depth coaching, working on planning, working on developing assessments, and then for teachers who aren't necessarily a good fit, we find ways to help them, find somewhere else to work.
Great. Thank you for that. So let's go on to the third category. This is curriculum, classroom practices, and academic support. It's really a focus on those things that have more of a concentrated, are about the classroom academic learning experience. Say a little bit about what is happening in your school in that area that really, again, helps drive Black student success.
Yeah, I would say expectations. A lot for us is about not only helping our students understand that, but really it's about helping our staff understand that every child before them is as capable, if not more capable, than a child elsewhere. We talk a lot about implicit bias and the impact that can have, and how subtle things can kind of shift down our focus. So we work to make sure that we've got really high quality curriculum in place for teachers, that we're using high quality instructional materials, and that we're constantly questioning the idea of, can our kids do this, right? Well, these kids can't do this. Well, why not? Where's the evidence? What scaffolds are in place to help them get there? How are we making sure they're accessing grade level content all the time? So those conversations, again, coaches are regularly having those. When we're doing our data analysis, we're constantly asking the question, well, why couldn't they actually access more rigorous material? What were the barriers, and how do we eliminate those barriers? The next one is, we're an early college, and by definition, early colleges mean that every student has access to college while they're in high school. PSEO, God, I'm dating myself. College Credit Plus is great, but it's also optional, and very often historically marginalized students do not actually find their way into those courses. At our school, it's a built-in expectation. You will complete at least 3 college classes while you're in high school, and since that's kind of built in from the very beginning, those conversations go back to, here's when you're going to do the courses, and here's the supports that are going to be in place. And so it's an expectation that every kid has to meet. And then, of course, we believe that we need to have more time with kids, so we use our breaks. We have certain kids who are invited to come in over spring break. Our summers, where we obviously don't run a year-round school just yet, but if you're here at any of our campuses, you're going to see kids in the building almost all the time with teachers in a structured learning environment. Sometimes they're kids who are struggling, sometimes they're kids who just need extra support, sometimes they're kids who we know may not necessarily sort of thrive if they were left on their own for the summer, but we're almost always with kids when we can.
Perfect, great. So that sense of use of time is really, it sounds like you're being very creative in that space as well, both during the regular school year, and then, like you said, breaks and additional opportunities like that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's go to the fourth category, which are student supports and empowerment. This really involves, more of the, in some cases, more of the non-academic kinds of aspects, addressing, student voice and empowerment. You already gave a great example in terms of involving students in your hiring process, things around school culture and climate. Talk a little bit about what's happening in your school in that area.
Yeah, I would mention again the idea of like having this advisory system is not just like a thing that we put on. It really, if you walk around, you hear a lot of kids refer to their advisor as mom or dad, or it really becomes much more of a connected thing. This is also will come up later on, but every advisor is required to do a home visit. So we actually go sit in the living room of our families, look them in the eye, and ask, "What do I need to know to educate your child this year? You're the expert on your child. I'm not." By the way, I'm sorry, I'm talking fast. I want to make sure that we keep to our time. So I'm sorry if I too many words per minute. I'm from the East Coast, is what we do. And so, we also have City Connects as a support for all of our students. If you're unfamiliar with that model, City Connects is where you have either a counselor or a social worker on staff whose job it is to work with teachers to tier out every kid in the building, and then to identify for students within those tiers, if they're in tier 1 and they're doing really well, what enrichments are they receiving? For kids who are kind of further down, what enrichments are they receiving, but also what interventions are they receiving? And a lot of that's not just internal. We also look to what's happening out in the community. What resources does the Y make available? What resources does the YW make available? What are the things that are out there in our community that our students can take advantage of and be a part of? And so then we're having that conversation about every single student, twice a year. We train our teachers in conscious discipline and restorative practices. So we do circles quite a bit. At the older grades, we do peer mediation. So a lot of conversation about how do we resolve conflicts before it becomes a bigger conflict? How do we kind of intervene before it turns into a fight? How do we deal with those issues early on? And also, how do we build up? How we raise up leaders that want to intervene, right? What we don't want to have happen is a school culture where a fight happens and kids are kind of egging it on. We want to make sure that students have a sense of ownership and pride in this is my school, this is my community, and we don't do that stuff here. So a lot of conversations about how do we kind of proactively step in and stop those things. We also have a house system, which is aligned with our PBIS system. So at our elementary and our middle school, kids are assigned to a house. Think of like Harry Potter. If you're struggling for like what the concept is, and essentially you are kind of tied in with that group. We want to get away from this idea of like individual competition and think more about community. And so you're a part of like this larger group. And so you earn credit for your group by doing various things. And we honestly, we're not giving out real prizes. Like there's a cup that sits in a case that you look at and say, y'all won that cup this year. Congratulations. You take one picture with it, it goes back in there for the next year. But the whole notion is you're working towards something as a collaborative, as a collective. And then because our schools tend to be pretty close knit, we do summer bridge every year with new students because we know that it can be really daunting to come in when everyone else has been together for a long time. And so we have the new kids come in, they'll spend time with our folks to kind of getting used to and getting connected to a lot of what we do.
Perfect. So let's go to the fifth category. This is really about, you spoke a little bit about partnerships and community and family supports. You talked about your home visits. Anything else you want to add in the category of community and family supports and partnerships around what you're doing that you think would help inform this work?
Yes, a number of things. We have parent advisory committees at both the campus level and then also at the organization level. So we make sure before we make a number of, not every major decision, but a number of major decisions, that we're kind of bouncing this around with that parent advisory group. They often help us avoid making dumb decisions. We actually, for the first time this past year, we've done informal surveys all the time. We've actually launched we're using TNTP's parent survey, which has been really, really useful for us to get feedback from parents. I mentioned the home visits already. I haven't touched on one of the larger aspects of our high school, and that's our gateway system. We don't have time for me to go all the way into it.
Okay.
Suffice to say, we require every student to complete at least 3 job shadows, 2 internships, and 100 hours of community service. The idea behind this is we want our students to kind of see their ability to connect in the community. We also want them to understand and see what careers and industries are available to them, especially here in Dayton. Believe it or not everyone wants to stay in Dayton. I don't know why. And if we can save them from majoring in a major that they're not interested in, right? If I say I want to be an attorney, I go shadow an attorney and realize that now I'm not interested in that. That may have saved you $25,000. It may have saved you a lot more than that if you can go another way. And then we work really hard to build a ton of relationships with our local colleges. We actually have some of the universities come on site and teach classes. We've had opportunities for our students to participate in research projects with universities, lots and lots of ways for us to connect with higher ed, especially since our high school is located on the University of Dayton's campus.
Perfect. Okay, let's go to the last category. And this one I want to handle a little bit differently because, again, you heard me say at the beginning how important data is. So talk a little bit first about the data. What data do you use? And if I said to you, prove to me or convince me using numbers that that your students are performing well and that you're making improvement, how do you respond to that question, and what kind of data do you put on the table?
So our ultimate measure is college graduation. So that one we look at, are our kids getting into college, and are they graduating from college? We look at OST data. We look at OST.
So let's pause there for a second, right?
Sure.
Because I mean that's such a lagged. I mean you're
is.
really putting your own credibility on the line for something that could take 4, 5, 6 years out, and
Yes.
that means you're having to stay connected with students and track them, and create and we may not be able to get into this, but the feedback loops that help you understand what could you be doing better to ensure college level success.
Yes. It's everything you said there is true. We're actually in the middle of a grad study now. We study our national student clearinghouse data fanatically. We try to do a pretty good job. We're a small organization. We try and do as good a job as we can of staying connected to our graduates. We have a few tricks there that we use that work really well, that I'd be happy to discuss offline with anybody. But yeah, that's a huge one for us. To go further down the list,
Please.
Obviously standardized test data. We use MAP as well. I'm sorry, my brothers keep texting me, so if y'all hear that sound, I do apologize.
Okay.
We obviously pull a lot of that data. We look at attrition data to see, are we losing students in school year and over the summer? We look at we look at teacher turnover rate. Are we if we're rating teachers to look and see who are our highest achieving teachers, are we retaining those folks? And also, are we retaining our teachers of color? Hiring folks. We've done a good job of hiring folks. We're struggling in some ways with retaining high quality teachers of color. So that's certainly an area of focus for us. I feel like I'm missing one. I did one I didn't write down. I feel like I'm missing an obvious one, but
That's okay.
I'll leave it there.
Okay. All right, so that really concludes our walk through the different categories. Reflect for, again, I'm doing pretty well, staying on time. Reflect a little bit on these categories. Do they make sense? Even as I listened to you, I kind of got a sense that maybe some things that you talked about in one category actually fit in another category, and maybe there might be some merging. Say a little bit about, your thoughts. Do these 6 have the right feel to you, or do you have any comments about what might be missing, or how they're organized?
Well, I appreciate that you don't have DEI pulled out as its own category. I think that will be a mistake. I think that it should be fully integrated into all of them, and we should be thinking about each of those through that lens. So I first off appreciate that. I'm sure that reasonable minds could disagree on that one, however.
And I loved how you talked about your own staff meetings having those 3 parts with the equity component just as a regular kind of paying attention to that as just part of your organizational culture.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My brothers, we even texted in days, and they just decided right now to text constantly. I don't know what's happening. I just muted it. I apologize for that. I'm sorry, Paolo. I was so distracted. I did not catch all of that. So, but in terms of the categories, yeah, I would, a lot of these, I certainly would shrink. I think that you could merge a few of these categories. I don't know that leadership and staff involvement and development were terribly different in my mind as I was thinking through them. A lot of them were overlapping in terms of, how we would think about it as an organization. But and I also know that the data analysis and organizational improvement processes also seem to be embedded in quite a few of the other categories as well. So if you're looking to kind of shift a few of those would be the only shifts I had. I would certainly not. I think it was all encompassing though. I didn't see anything that was missing, at least from my perspective.
Great. So we'll call time. Hopefully that has given everybody, all the other task force members and my facilitators, a sense. Now, let's make a few observations. You don't have to talk as fast as Dave. You're going to have a full hour. The second is, rather than just having one person do everything, the facilitators will take you through one component at a time, and everybody should chime in. And in the list that were sent out, there are the practitioners, again, who will be more like Dave in reflecting on what they do. And what will happen is some will be additive, right? Like if somebody were to follow Dave, they might have said, oh yeah, and one other thing I do is this, or they might have said, well, Dave covered everything that I think is important in this category. So that's all okay to happen. And then you also bring in, after the practitioners reflect, bring in the other voices around the table and see what they might be able to add. And sometimes they won't have much to add, and that's okay. So again, we've got these 6 categories. So there's going to be about 8 to 10 minutes on each of them, and then a little bit of time left at the end to wrap up. Some will take a little bit longer, others won't take as long. This is where I would ask if anybody has any questions. And Kitty, you have your hand up. So what's on your mind?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, Dave, that was awesome. I do have a question. How do you select the students that are in that procedure to interview staff? I really like that.
I can answer really quickly.
Go ahead.
It ends up being very random. We do end up having kids who give us really good feedback who we want to have in. We try to get as consistent. Really, the key thing is we want to have a consistent group of kids doing it. If it happens during the school year, we'll actually have them come in during the day and teach a full class of students, right? So we'll actually have them teach that. We'll give them a lesson, they teach the lesson, and then we can actually ask those students. But we've found when we've handpicked the kids, we haven't got, honestly, as authentic a classroom experience for the teacher. So we found that random is actually been better.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any questions about the process here? Charlotte McGuire.
First of all, I want to congratulate Dave. I haven't seen you in a while since you become superintendent. You were president of the board the last time we visited. It is a unique environment for education and growing the next, what I call the future leaders. Could you talk a bit about parent engagement, especially since there is a concern about parental rights and authority? Because what I see you doing, or what I've seen in the past, is cultivating a true partnership, closing the gap first between the home and the school, and how you keep parents engaged and knowing that they still have responsibility of their children along with you for their educational outcomes. Please.
Dave,
just real quick.
Oh.
Yeah, the quick and dirty version is thank you. First of all, it's been too long. We had to connect, but now that all the stuff's kind of calming down a little bit. It's been too long. Yeah, I think really quickly. Yes, having regular, meaningful conversations with parents. So we have monthly required parent meetings that we want to see you, we want to talk to you. Also providing lots of opportunities for real feedback, creating real conversation for where we can have back and forth dialogue. Where it isn't us talking at you, but it's an opportunity for us to hear and listen to you. Those home visits really are the launching pad for it, right? We come, we sit down in your living room, we look you in the eye, we ask you questions, we give you our cell phone numbers, you can text us. The whole idea is we want to have this be a reciprocal relationship because we can't count on the parent having had a good high school experience or a good middle school experience. We have to make sure that we're letting them know this will be different for your child, and you've got to trust us so we can kind of be partners. I can go a lot longer, but I know we're short on time here.
See, and maybe this is the flaw in my facilitation design. I really didn't allow for a lot of the back and forth question and answering. So I'm going to leave it up to my facilitators to exercise, on the one hand, a little bit of flexibility, but again, the point should be not to get too deeply involved, because the next thing you know, you'll spend an hour just on leadership and you won't have touched on the other categories. The other thing I commit to everybody is that if you keep notes to yourself, so for instance, if other people have questions for Dave, write notes to yourself, send those as an email to me, and I'll make sure to put them in front of Dave and he can answer, and we can share out more information information about the things he might be doing. And do that in your settings as well, because what we really want to do is get some ideas out on the table and talk about the framework, and try to wrap that up within an hour span. And again, I also acknowledge that if you don't get to all 6 categories, that's okay too. So what I want you all to do is feel like you've had a chance to both have some input, reflect with each other on this framing, and go from there. Tom, you have your hand up, so I'm going to turn to you for one last comment, and then we're going to go right to our breakouts. Hopefully everybody has gotten an email from Carolyn Jones that shows what their team's link is for the breakout session. Carolyn, do you have anything to add to that in terms of members making the transition?
I do not. That is exactly what I want them to be aware of, and I will add the other links. If you did not receive a link, I will add those to the chat here shortly.
Right. And if you are not a member of the task force but want to join a group, send either put your email address in the chat, or email Carolyn, and she will give you the 4 links that you can choose which ones you want to join. With that, Tom Roberts, go ahead.
Yeah, Carol, Paul, I was going to ask a procedural question, but I want to say hi to Dave. Isn't he also a DECA graduate?
I am not a DECA graduate.
Okay.
I wish I was that young. However, unfortunately, I am not.
I wish I was a DECA graduate.
And so the question, I think Carolyn kind of answered it. I've gone into small groups several ways. Some is that you've sent us the small groups. In other ways, there'll be a something on the screen, and we'll pick. And so I really want to understand, how do I go into a small group?
So
I'm in group 2.
We've had some problems with the automatic breakout. So what we've done is we've sent, I defined the groups. I sent that to you in an early communication. You should have received an email just within the last 15 minutes that has the link for your group. So you will leave this meeting, you will connect with that link, and then the facilitators will take you through the process, and then we will all return here 1 hour from when we start. It looks like it'd probably be close to 2:25, 2:30 at the, from where we are. Then you will have to leave that meeting and rejoin this meeting at around 2:30.
Gotcha.
What was your second? Did you have a second procedural question?
No,
Tom?
I just want to make sure I was following it. Okay, so leave this, look for the second link, and then link into the small
into
group.
your group. It should say whatever, it should say group number X. This is the email for that group, and then just join that group. Okay. Right. If there are no other questions, go ahead and let's all leave this group. There'll be a couple people that'll hang out here just to keep it open. I think Carolyn's going to do that. And go into your groups. Facilitators, hopefully you have a good sense of what you're going to accomplish. And then we'll see everybody back here at 2:30. I see people returning, so we'll give this a few more minutes for everybody to wrap up their work and get back in, and then we'll report out. And so while I'll repeat these instructions, but while we're waiting, I'm not going to have each group report on every item. So if you are group 1, I'm going to ask you to report out on leadership, but then also data analysis and organizational improvement. So that's the first one and the 6th one. If you're group 2, I'm going to ask you to report out on number 2, which is staff involvement and development. If you're group 3, I'm going to ask you to report out in curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. And group 4 will report out on number 4 and 5, which is student supports and empowerment, and community and family supports and partnerships. And I'll repeat that once we get everybody back.
Oh, that's how we do it? Okay.
Yeah. Now I will collect, of course, Merle, all the comments and reflections that everybody had and use that to inform our synthesis. But I think it would, rather than just having the first group go through everything and then everybody.
That makes sense. That wasn't the criticism when I said that. I was just oh, is that how we're going to do it? That's how that was.
Very good. Very good. I always feel like I have to explain myself.
But that's okay.
Yeah. So it looks like we have everybody. So I will repeat what I said, and that the report out we're going to handle that not everybody's going to report everything.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right.
We'll ask group 1.
I can't hear you. Somebody
know how they draw and drag things out. And
there we go. So group one will report out on its discussion. So we're going to do this in two chunks. One is we'll just talk about the different components, and what I'd like people to do, and whoever's reporting out, to highlight those things that were particularly interesting, or that you thought got a lot of attention or generated a lot of conversation in each category. Because if I just say, well, list all the things, and you give me 20 things, maybe that doesn't really give us the kind of flavor that we're looking for. So, but again, I'll let you use your best judgment on it. So what I'm going to do is have each group report out on one or two components. So group one, I'm going to ask you to report out on number 1 and number 6, which is leadership and data analysis and organizational improvement. Group 2 is going to report out on item 2, which is staff involvement and development. Group 3 is going to report out on number 3, which is curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. And group 4 is going to report out on both items 4 and 5, student supports and empowerment, and community and family supports and partnerships. So I'm going to give you just a fewest moments to kind of collect your thoughts there. While the reporters do that a little bit, I'd love to get just the briefest feedback on the experience, these small groups. What did you think? Our desire was to give you time to talk about, what you do, what you know. Did that work for you? Did you feel like you had some good, interesting, and contributing conversations? I see some heads nodding. Anybody want to verbalize? Let me check my hand. Anybody raising their hand?
Paulo, I'm not raising my hand, but okay. I'll just jump in. I want to say we could have spent 2 hours in conversation. I think that's the biggest thing takeaway, and it was really rich. It there were some subtopics that kind of came up that we could have delved into. Perfect. Perfect. Certainly we could think about that in the future.
Right. And so after we do this quick report out on the 6 areas, we'll then have a little conversation about the framework generally, and whether people think it's the right group of items and what have you. And again, I'd like to wrap up at about 3 o'clock, because I know some people have to go. I, as always, will be ready to linger on for another 10 or 15 minutes if we happen to run a little bit long. So with that, who's going to report out for group 1 and talk to us a little bit about what you talked about in leadership and under data analysis and organizational improvement?
Well, Paulo, can you hear me?
I can, Antoinette. Good.
My computer went kind of nutsy at the end of the last one. It went completely black, and I loved John was like, well, put it in the chat. And I was like, if I could see the screen, I would. But here I got everything.
Excellent.
Good stuff. And so I have to summarize in 3 sentences or less. The one thing that came across was the need for strong leadership. And there was a discussion about it really starts with the board, and that you have a strategic plan, and that the true work really starts with the staff. And there was a lot of talk about making teachers leaders and taking leadership. The other thing I thought I really liked that they talked about, that as leaders, as a principal, or as a superintendent, you have to be bold enough to make change when something is not working. The buck stops with me. They talked about using the Ohio improvement process. They talked about the importance of PTA and having student leadership, and also diversifying the staff. Leadership has a focus on cultural competencies, specifically if you have a white staff, to make sure they understand about that. We ended up having a lot of discussion on balanced calendar. And so I'm sure that's going to be some discussion later about how it really made a difference. And then finally, really talked about in leadership, how are you engaging communities and how important it is to the success of Black students. And then again, there was a lot of talk about the importance of leadership at the building level.
Yep.
So my takeaway was that leadership is not only with the principal and superintendent, but it really runs through almost everything in the school, particularly with teachers.
Yep. Yep.
The data analysis and organization, look at attendance, discipline data, GPA. One of the things they say is that sometimes that can be very depressing data. It's not what you want, but they also look at growth, and growth becomes really important in terms of looking at where your students are, doing formative assessment and looking at that data, also surveying students, parents, and staff, and one of the people talked about looking at discipline data every single month, and also involving students in their data analysis. So that's the quick and dirty of it.
Oh, interesting. Involving students. I think that's going to be a through line throughout. Is like how are students involved in every aspect of this work?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Antoinette. And the other interesting thing that I heard from you, because the second purpose of our charge is about implementation. What are those strategies that allow this work to actually get implemented well? And a couple of the things you referenced speak to that. And just so that the task force knows, as we're synthesizing what you told us, we will begin to sort of populate that part of the conversation, because that's going to be sort of the next task. At our next meeting, we will, we'll continue to refine the practices framework, but then the implementation story will also begin to unfold. Great, thank you. Who is the Group 2 report out person? And talk to us a little bit about the staff involvement and development side of the equation.
Sure, Paulo, it's me. I'm going to report out for Group 2. We know Kendall did an awesome job, but he was our lone educator, so he did a lot of talking. So
okay.
He is graciously allowing me to try to summarize for him.
Perfect.
So, and he has promised he would jump in and correct me if I say anything incorrect. This category, he shared that he's done equity training with staff, really focusing in on implicit bias and recognizing their own bias. He did a book study with a book called Not Light, But Fire, How to Lead Meaningful Conversations in the Classroom, and it's by Matthew R.K. And that really gave teachers some comfort and some understanding on how to have those. A lot of teachers don't enter these conversations because they're afraid they're going to offend or say something that might be taken the wrong way. And so he said that book really helped educators feel comfortable with it. Then we moved to recruitment. How does he recruit teachers? How does the district recruit teachers? He attends recruitment fairs. Right now, the district attends all the large universities here within the state, but they have not gone to an HBCU, and he would like to start being able to attend, go to recruitment fairs at HBCU. I keep saying this, sorry. At the school that was shared, a lot of pride was shared that has grown. I think the educators that are of color in the district, as well as the males. And this was a middle school here in Central Ohio. There are at times, it was about how do you select teachers was the next part that we went through. He has his equity team, as well as if it's a math science, right, a person from the academic team as well in on the interview. And at times parents could be a part of. He was very intrigued by what Dave shared with us earlier about having students involved in the interview process as well. So it was a good, insightful, we had a lot of time to discuss and have good, meaningful conversation in this area.
Excellent, excellent. And maybe what I should do is at the end, maybe I could just stop and say, does anybody else have a compelling observation they'd like to add to what was just presented on this second category of staff involvement and development that maybe came out in their discussion without like just listing lots of things. So, one or two additional items. Anyone? Okay, so let's go to the third, Group 3, and the third category, which is curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. Who's reporting out for Group 3?
I guess that's me. Is that me, Marva?
Okay. Yes, thank you for agreeing to my request.
First of all, I want to thank Marva Jones. He was a great facilitator. I want to thank Don, and he said it's okay for me to call him SHIP, for their contribution as best practice exemplars, if you will, and Miss Will.I.am Moore for her wisdom. When we talk about curriculum, classroom, best practices and academic support and alignment, and especially for AP classes, The two things that came out was Black students need to see themselves in those curriculums or the lesson plans, but they should be able to engage and inspire. Curricula and classroom practices should be able to engage students in the learning, but also inspire them to greatness. And we all agree that we should all keep expectations high. And the more you, we talked about relationship between the learner and the teacher. And the more you can add value or affirm the worth, if you will, which is gets into the fourth category, the more they will engage in learning. So it becomes more individualized and personalized, recognizing no two students are alike, and our job is to tap in to everyone's potential to succeed. That's it. Did I do okay, Marva?
As always, thank you, Vice President McGuire.
Great. So again, I'll open it up to everybody. Anybody else want to add any particularly notable things they heard in this arena of curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports?
Paulo, can I add from group
Please.
4?
Yes.
That there was some good discussion about acknowledging that the curriculum that their schools were using was not producing results. So they chose other curriculum. Then that they were able to see differences there, and kind of related to what Miss Charlotte said, which I thought was a really good point. I can't remember if Dave said it, to be sure that they have books in the school that are written by Black authors, so that the students know that. And kind of something that I hadn't thought of, so thanks for pointing it out, was we tend to teach with the books that we were taught with and that we read. And so teachers need to expose themselves and open their mind and go look for those authors and actually incorporate them into their classroom. So I thought that was a great point.
Great. Other additions, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned in our group, which happened when I was teaching at Charles Eliot in Cleveland, was author visits. Teacher arranged for Sharon Draper to visit the school, and at the time, she was just really the talk of everybody was talking about her book. So that really adds to the excitement of the curriculum. When students actually meet the authors.
Great.
Also,
any other
Paulo?
Yes.
This is Nick Walsnovich. Without getting into any great detail, we talked about the benefits specifically of balanced calendar with intersessions on students who come from the inner city. There is some really good research that supports that. I just didn't want that to be lost.
No, perfect. Yeah, a lot of these time issues are really emerging as especially to the extent that they allow additional time without impinging on the regular academic calendar. I think that's we're hearing a lot of that.
Hey, Paulo, it's Randall. Just to add to the curriculum piece, I forget which group it was in because I was in all the groups going around.
Yeah, great.
But in one of the Central Ohio districts, they have international baccalaureate program at the high school and AP programs at the high school. So the principal is a middle school principal and was talking about removing the academic barriers at the middle level to prep kids and give them access by the time they get to the high school level. So basically increasing the rigor at the middle level. And it's just not for the the African American kids, but it ended up being great for everybody, specifically the African American kids.
Great. It's that whole transit. How do you tend to what comes next in the setting that you're in? Yeah. Any other good observations in this category? If not, go ahead, Charlotte. Do you want to add one more thing?
The one thing is being in tune with the trajectory of success from pre-K to 12, from one grade to the next grade. We need to know where students are and how we either enrich or intervene to not only that they're on grade level, but they have the opportunity to aspire to AP classes or the International Baccalaureate program. But we need to know that in, I guess, grade time from pre-K all the way to 12th grade.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, let's go to group 4, reporting out on first student supports and empowerment, and then community and family supports and partnerships.
Okay, Paulo, I'm representing Group 4. I was voluntold as the Group 4 representative, so we focus more on student supports and empowerment around in supporting students in the college experience and making sure they feel empowered to be successful there. So there was concern that our students are taking college classes either online or in the high school by a high school teacher, and that they should be kind of pushed out into the college setting while they are still able to fall back and have the support and help of those high school teachers. So when they make mistakes and mess up, the high school teacher can help them to overcome that and to be successful. Another example was pen pals with current college students so that they practice their writing skills, but then they were also able to learn from the successes and the mess ups of the current college students. They could try not to repeat the same mistakes, or to hear about why some of their friends didn't make it to college, or why some of their friends were just not successful in college. So they could try to be prepared. Would you like me to go on to 5 or pause?
Well, let's pause for a minute. Anybody else want to add anything to the student supports and empowerment discussion that might have emerged in their conversations? Okay, let's go on then to 5.
Okay, for community and family supports and partnerships, general consensus around too many partners is probably never a bad thing. Making as many connections and partnerships that improve things for the staff and for the kids is always beneficial. There was a little bit of concern around sometimes, or maybe all the time, might be a building call, that each partner has to kind of have an assigned task, or exactly what are they supporting or helping with. So there was some discussion around that. And then also for student voice, when the school or there's an issue or a challenge, who do the students think might make a good partner, and asking the students and letting them go out and call and find partners and get free recycling bins and things like that for the school.
Any other comments on? Yeah, go ahead.
I believe it was Willie Ann that brought up in our group the ability to tap into fraternities and sororities, and that we may not be doing that as much as we could be. And, you know, as they've gone on to other professions and are out in the community, they would be wonderful to have back into the schools.
Great.
One of the other things we talked about in Group 4, kind of combining student supports and community and family supports, was that we have a all-boys school in Cleveland where every boy has a connection with a caring adult. And it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in the school. It could be somebody who owns a corner store or someone who works at the Boys and Girls Club, because it can get kind of burdens, really, really hard sometimes for teachers to take on that effort. But making sure that the students have somebody that a caring adult who they can look to when there's an issue, which is really, really important.
Perfect. Okay. So let's transition to the last part of our discussion, is really around the framework. And I'll open this up maybe first to the report out people, but then to everybody generally. What reflections emerged in your conversation about these 6 categories and their framing? Was there any feelings or perceptions that you got really strongly about modifications, either things that were missing, merging categories, or what have you?
Group 4, Apollo, felt that collapsing 1 and 2, the leadership and staff involvement and development, into 1. They were similar, that they could be collapsed. They felt pretty strongly that 3, 4, and 5 should stay as standalones, and that the category 6, the data analysis and organizational, that it should kind of be clearly called out, that it should be included in each of those 5 categories. So it's just kind of into them.
Yeah, the merging of 1 and 2 is kind of interesting, because in many respects we're asking staff to also be leaders. And so as you develop developing staff is as much a leadership kind of endeavor as like looking at the principal as the leader and the staff as non-leaders. So I think I'm hearing that. Anybody else? Who else wants to reflect on the framing or the categories? Go ahead, Charlotte.
I think they're all interrelated. One of the things we came out with, there should be a strategic plan with the whole child framework embedded, that everyone in a district's community is aware of it, including the parents and the children. And they have the freedom to do ID, I call it innovation and design, to meet the unique needs and aspirations of every child in that district, and that plan is strategic, so you have strategic partners. And I also like to make the case, I think Carolyn hit on it, and Meryl, the fact that you need individualized supports and partnerships, even family supports and partnerships, even mentoring to the whole family, not just the child, to close the gap between the school and the home. And we think that's very important. That came out. And that, I see Miss William Moore shaking her head. So am I saying that right, Miss Moore? So definitely, I think it's a plan of action that everyone in that community is aware of, has bought into, and can inform it, so you can continually do innovation and design for every child, and and this is something else we felt, keep expectations high.
Yeah, that theme has been coming out in any number of these presentations, expectations, because I think we all understand that the minute somebody is convinced that, you know what, maybe Susie can't do this, that affects the whole, approach to that child and what have you. And so, and I think we all know that kids are amazing and that they invariably always accomplish and exceed the expectations that you set for them.
And something that that I mentioned in group 4, we talk about teacher expectations of students, but we also have to look at principals having high expectations of their teachers. I gave an example of teachers gossiping in the hallway about students, unfortunately, and the principal would call them out and say, no, we're not going to do that. So it has to be, to me, the principal has to have high expectations of the staff also, so that they all function in a way that's healthy for students.
Yep. Okay. All right, we are close to end. I've got 5 minutes here to do a little bit of a quick wrap up. Again, we will take all the comments. We will synthesize those in a way, probably make some modifications to the framework, and maybe begin to lay out how we might think about these framework components and some of the key ideas under them as we continue to work on that purpose 1 of identifying best practice models. We will also start, and again, I'll send out, one of my usual emails to you all to get you starting to think about some of the implementation work too. And again, you all who are practitioners and doing a lot of implementation work, or those of you who have done it in your prior history, you've had a little bit of a glimpse of that in this conversation. Part of it's about planning, as Charlotte McGuire mentioned. Part of it's about, making sure you've got a shared language and a common approach to what you're going to be doing, and that there's understanding of that. And then there's just good implementation practice. What are your plans? How are you monitoring the fidelity of that implementation? How do you make course corrections and those kinds of things? So we're going to give that some thought as we continue to polish the framework. And again, I might also get some of my staff to start building out what a template might look like, and that piece of one of the other purposes that we're working on. I'm also gonna ask some of you I'll ask all of you to express whether you'd like to participate in a couple of subcommittees that, again, might drill down a little bit deeper into some of the other purpose statements. Especially like how are we going to disseminate? What are our strategies to use for dissemination? Those kinds of things. So stay tuned for that ask, and be ready to say, yeah, I'm willing to take on participation in a subcommittee that might have a special purpose to it, so we can continue to work on the different strands as we continue this trajectory. The other thing is, I mentioned in my last email to you about a shared book study around Karen Chenoweth's book, Districts That Succeed. A couple people responded that they'd be interested in doing that. I will provide a few more details about what I'd like to do on that front, and invite those of you who want to continue kind of, one of the nice things about this book is, first of all, there's a chapter on Steubenville, so I love the Ohio connection. But then there are also like 3 other chapters on other districts that are really doing great work, and then a kind of a synthesis section that I think dovetails nicely. Again, I don't want to make this mandatory for everybody, but I think some of us doing a shared reading experience that can help us, again, strengthen our own understandings as we go into continuing to refine this work. Finally, I've been having a conversation with Education Trust out of Washington around their framework that they've developed. I was originally thinking I might have them present at this meeting, but I really wanted to get more of you all engaged. What I'm thinking of doing is scheduling a little learning session in between our July meeting and the August meeting that would just give them an opportunity to walk us through some of their work and how it might interface and stimulate our thinking about the work that we're doing. So stay tuned for a little bit of information like that, if that makes sense.
Is Willie Ann trying to say something? I keep seeing her hand go up.
I don't know. Willie Ann? She's good. She's good.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Any other questions or comments? Our next regular meeting is scheduled for August 16th, 12:30 to 3. And we've got them scheduled. We've got meetings scheduled out for September and October as well.
Hey, Paul, I had to step away, take a call, but in our group, did Julia report about a book that was being read? And maybe we can put together a list of books that, as we hear them, they're being recommended, and we can spend our summer kind of read some of these books. But the Westerville School District was reading a book called Not Light But Fire, which was classroom curriculum, discussing race in the classroom, which they enjoyed.
Yeah, Julia did mention that, and I'm always on the lookout for people who have sort of synthesized and present information in a way that's accessible to us and can inform our work. Other questions before we adjourn? Hopefully, I hope you had an enjoyable experience. Always know that your feedback is really important to me. If you think this didn't work, or I struggled, or I think we're doing something wrong, or Paulo, I'd love to see us do a little more of this or that, those are always welcome. Don't feel like you can't access me. All of you should have my email. All of you should be honest and upfront, because after all, you're the essential part of this work, and I want to make sure that we are moving in a direction that makes sense for you. And if you think we're skipping something or missing something or not moving aggressively enough on a certain piece of it, just make that clear to me. I value deeply your input. Okay, with that, thank you all. Have a great weekend, and we'll be in touch.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.